the border, more than 178,000 migrants stopped at the southwest border in April.
That is a slight increase over March and the highest one-month total in 2 decades. The new data released by U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the number of single adults, the main driver in this data. At the same time, the number of kids crossing the border without their parents has dropped.
So what do these numbers really mean? Investigator Liliana Soto and ABC 15 data analyst Garrett Archer taking an in-depth look at this new data.
It's been a consistent pattern for the last 20 years. Apprehension numbers at the border usually grow from December to March, but data from March broke a record. 19,000 children encountered at the border was something never seen before.
The number of unaccompanied children apprehended by U.S. Customs and Border Protection is at about just over 17,100. It represents about a 1,700 drop, and that's about 10%.
The number of single adults apprehended by Border Patrol continues to be the main issue. It went from 100,000 encounters in March to 108,000 in April. So what's driving the increase on single adult apprehensions?
What's interesting in the data is that when we look at when Title 42 began to be enforced, we see a 613% increase in apprehensions for single adults from that time period to today.
Title 42 began in March of last year. The policy was implemented under President Trump to stop the spread of COVID-19. According to U.S. Customs and Border Protection, 62% of those single adults apprehended in April were expelled back to Mexico under this policy. Meanwhile, in Nogales, Arizona, Santa Cruz County Sheriff David Hathaway says the numbers alone don't tell the full story about what's really happening at the border.
If you assume that it keeps going the same pace till the end of the year, which it probably won't, it will get slightly over 1 million, 1.1 million, but that's nothing out of the ordinary. That was happening practically every year in the 80s and in the 90s and in the 2000s.
2000, in fact, there was about 1.6 million apprehensions. Before then, there were several. There's actually 19 times since 1960 that the number of apprehensions was over 1 million, and most of those did occur in the 90s and the 80s.
Santa Cruz County Sheriff says there's no border crisis, but Arizona Governor Doug Ducey disagrees. He signed a letter yesterday along with 19 other governors sent to the White House. The letter says, in part, the crisis is too big to ignore and is now spilling over the border states into all of our states. Only 2 of the 19 governors signing this letter are actually from border states. Hathaway says Governor Ducey has not once visited his county this year.
I tried to get a meeting with him. I requested a meeting so I could tell him the reality versus the hype of what's happening here on the border. My meeting was declined.
As for the number of children in Border Patrol custody, back in March, there were more than 5,000 children. CBP says today the number has dropped to less than 500 kids. But data obtained by the Associated Press this week reveals the federal government has 21,000 kids housed across the U.S. in facilities like shelters, hotels, and emergency military sites. Liliana Soto, ABC 15, Arizona.